Here- There we go. And Tiffany, Brooke, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start and you can let Tiffany be the host though.
I'll go ahead and pass this over to Tiffany then.
All right. Well, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. And what a gift that you can give yourself is learning more about this disease and understanding its risk factors and stages, as well as kind of what's going on in the brain when we talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. So, if you've got any questions throughout the program, of course, at the end, if we've got more specific ones we can address, you feel free to drop them in the chat. As Tiffany does the program, I will drop some links and things in the chat and I can answer any questions that are in there. But I'd like to introduce Tiffany Woodward. She is one of our community education volunteers and is also an instructor at the ECU College of Business and comes to us because of a personal connection. She has lost both her maternal grandmother and her mother due to Alzheimer's. So that's what's brought her into being able to educate and raise awareness and understanding among everyone in the community. So I will go ahead and let Tiffany start off our program.
All right, so thank you, Brooke, for the introduction. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen at this point in time. Is that correct? Am I sharing my screen correctly?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, thank you to Brooke for the introduction. As she mentioned, I am a community educator with the Eastern North Carolina chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. This is a relatively new role for me, so I'm sort of still learning the ropes. I did choose to get involved with the association due to a very personal connection with the disease, as she mentioned, having lost two family members. So I watched, the progression of Alzheimer's through two very different lenses, one from the perspective of a child, because my grandmother was diagnosed when I was less than 10 years old. And, I saw my grandmother regularly during her progression with the disease, although I never really completely understood what she was going through at that time. And again, my second perspective was from that of an adult, where I experienced a very different view of Alzheimer's and dementia with my mother's progression. My parents moved to another state in 2013. So I went from seeing, my mom every week, weekly, to maybe twice a year. So I saw things in a very different way because I wasn't there with her constantly. So I'm here because I really like others to know and understand now what I wish I had known and understood then. So now how Alzheimer's has affected me. So let me share some statistics on how it is affecting the state of North Carolina. As of 2020, there were 180,000 North Carolinians aged 65 and older that were living with the disease. And by 2025, that number is expected to increase by around 17%. So, Bank of America Stadium, where the Panthers play, we could fill that stadium up twice, and with some extras with that number. There are over 350,000 residents of North Carolina that say they're unpaid caregivers for someone with Alzheimer's or another dementia. And the cost of Alzheimer's to the state Medicaid program is around 1.3 billion. And so that's projected to increase by about 22% by the time we reach 2025. So there's a huge impact for me, there's a huge impact for the state of North Carolina, and there's a huge impact to society at large as well. So this education program is designed for those that are interested in learning more about Alzheimer's and other dementias. So we're going to cover information that's related to Alzheimer's and dementia. We'll hear from some dementia experts, and we'll also get to listen to the perspectives of both individuals living with dementia and also their care partners. So Alzheimer's is a global crisis, and you are likely hearing more and more about it in your personal lives and on the news. So to explore the impact of Alzheimer's, we're going to start with a few questions to sort of test your knowledge about the disease. Now, all of the statistics that I'm going to share with you are coming from the Alzheimer's Disease Facts and Figures. And this is an annual report that's released by the Alzheimer's Association that reveals the burden of Alzheimer's and dementia on individuals, caregivers, the government, and also the nation's healthcare system. So to begin, how many Americans do you think are maybe living with Alzheimer's? you're welcome to pop that in the chat, or maybe just think about it, when you think about the numbers, how many might be floating around out there. And none of these numbers are small. So you know that the number is going to wind up being relatively large. And the answer is more than 6 million. And that number is projected to reach nearly 13 million by the year 2050. Now, worldwide, there's an estimated 55 million people that are currently living with dementia. Okay, so let's go to another question then. Think about how many Americans you might believe are currently providing unpaid care to help those that are living with Alzheimer's and dementia. And once again, none of these are small numbers. So you know the answer is going to be relatively large. So the answer here is over 11 million. Alzheimer's affects us at home and also at work, because more than 80% of care is typically provided at home, and that's delivered by family members, friends, or other unpaid caregivers. So of the 11 million caregivers, over half of those that are employed have reported having to go into work late, take time off from work, or even quit their jobs due to caregiver demands. So let's learn a few more statistics about the impact of Alzheimer's. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those statistics and numbers surprised you. But once again, the impact of Alzheimer's is relatively large, and it's worldwide. So you may hear the terms Alzheimer's and dementia used interchangeably quite often, and they are related concepts, but they are different. So in the next section, we're going to dive into this. But first, I'm going to throw out a few more questions to see what you may or may not know. So this one's a true or false. Is Alzheimer's a normal part of the aging process? The answer here is false. Alzheimer's and dementia are not normal. These are diseases that are much more than memory loss. Alzheimer's is a progressive and a fatal disease that kills nerve cells and tissue in the brain. It affects an individual's ability to remember and to think and to plan, and ultimately to function. So let's try another one. This one's another true or false. People under the age of 65 can develop Alzheimer's. Would you think that would be true or false? This one is surprisingly true. Now, this is called younger or early onset Alzheimer's, and the typical age that people typically develop this form of Alzheimer's is age 55. So next, we're going to hear from Dr. Heather Snyder as she explains the relationship between Alzheimer's and dementia.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
Now, as we heard, there are many causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common because it accounts for 60 to 80% of all cases. But each type has different causes and symptoms. For example, vascular dementia is the second most common type of dementia, and this is a decline in thinking skills that's caused by conditions that block or reduce blood flow to the brain, and that deprives them of oxygen and nutrients. And this sometimes results in things like uncontrollable laughter or crying, or maybe impairment in social situations. Dementia with Lewy bodies can be hard to distinguish from Alzheimer's in the very early stages, but this often presents with things like hallucinations and less prominent memory loss. Now, frontotemporal dementia, or FTD, this often presents at an earlier age than what is typical for Alzheimer's, and it is typically accompanied by marked physical changes, like an inability to walk or maybe even leave a bed, and then more prominent memory changes. Some of the less common forms of dementia are underdiagnosed, and they can be part of what is often referred to as mixed dementia. So there's a myth that dementia can only be diagnosed with an autopsy. But the fact is that while there is no one specific test to diagnose Alzheimer's or dementia, there are multiple tests that doctors can administer. A diagnosis of dementia requires further testing to identify the specific disease or another condition that is perhaps causing the symptoms someone's experiencing. It's important to seek an accurate early diagnosis for anyone that is displaying signs or symptoms of Alzheimer's or dementia. So we're going to hear from a family member about what an accurate diagnosis meant to them. So we'll listen to Gail, who shares why it's so important to know her husband's diagnosis.
Certainly, having the diagnosis of Lewy body was helpful in our planning because we began to understand where this was coming from in the brain, where otherwise we would not have known. Like we knew something was happening, but what was it? To give it a label actually helped, although it was a big umbrella. It explains some of the characteristics and symptoms that we were experiencing and seeing.
Now, there isn't a cure for Alzheimer's yet, but there is great value in an accurate diagnosis because it's going to mean access to treatment options. It's going to mean access to better medical care, and it also means more time for someone to plan for the future. So just to recap, we've discussed the differences between the terms dementia and Alzheimer's. We've learned about the prevalence of Alzheimer's and dementia, and also highlighted the fact that there are diseases, that these are diseases that are not normal parts of the aging process. Now, Alzheimer's is a disease of the brain, and the brain is our most complex organ. It's also our most powerful organ, despite the fact that it only weighs about 3 pounds. So we're going to hear from one of our experts about how Alzheimer's affects the brain.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, what we now call the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and impacts memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has 3 main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to brain tissue loss and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss, behavioral issues, problems with thinking, planning, and at the end stage, swallowing.
So as a brief recap, plaques are abnormal clusters of protein, and tangles are twisted strands of another protein. Now, scientists expect that these are the prime culprits in what causes cell death that results in the symptoms associated with Alzheimer's, such as changes in memory and thinking and behavior. So who's at risk for developing Alzheimer's and/or another dementia? Well, we all are, because everyone has a brain, and anyone with a brain is therefore going to be at risk. But there are a few known factors that also increase a person's risk. So let's see if you happen to know or think you know which one is most common. So if you had to guess, which of these factors that you see listed, genetics, family history, or age, would you think to be the greatest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease? Now, the answer here is age. Now, everything on this list is a risk factor, but age is the biggest one. Even though Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging, after age 85, the increased risk of developing Alzheimer's is close to 1 in 3. But family history can also be a factor, and family history takes into account things like environmental elements, lifestyle, and also socioeconomic influences. And genetics is absolutely also a factor. Genetics is strictly biological, and genetics concerns what genes you do or do not carry. So we'll hear again from Dr. Snyder as she explains more about the known risk factors.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown, but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's, and when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are 2 categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
So in addition to age, genetics, and family history, there are also some other populations who are at a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's or dementia. For example, African Americans and Hispanics are at a greater risk. And we don't know for sure why this is, but cardiovascular diseases in these groups, like high blood pressure and diabetes, those could be culprits. Hispanics and African Americans are typically diagnosed in the later stages of dementia than other populations. Now, women are also at a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's or dementia. Of the 6.7 million Americans that are living with Alzheimer's, about 2/3 of them are women. And again, we don't know exactly why that's the case. We know that women typically live longer than men, so that gives us more opportunity, a longer length of time to develop the disease. But longevity and lower death rates will not explain everything. So researchers are exploring genetics as another possible reason. So to recap, Alzheimer's disease involves the failure of nerve cells, the exact cause of which is still uncertain. But research has identified risk factors that do increase the likelihood of a person's development of Alzheimer's. Age is the greatest known risk factor. So an individual's risk for developing Alzheimer's increases at the age of 65. Family history is a known risk factor. If you have a parent or a sibling with the disease, that's going to increase your risk. Genetics may also play a role. There are 2 types of genes associated with Alzheimer's: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes determine someone's likelihood of developing Alzheimer's, but they don't guarantee that it will happen. Deterministic genes may directly cause a disease to develop, but these are actually fairly rare in Alzheimer's. They have only been found in a few hundred families around the world, and they're connected to early onset Alzheimer's. In addition, we know that African Americans and Hispanics and women are more likely to develop Alzheimer's. So no 2 individuals will experience the signs, the symptoms, and the progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. For example, my grandmother displayed symptoms of Alzheimer's at a much later stage in her life than my mother did. And my mother's symptoms were less obvious at early stages than those that my grandmother displayed. So let's hear from some individuals describing what it's like to live with dementia.
I'm like an overachiever and when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and you forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password and you just changed it last week and you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
Math, I can't do a simple tip anymore. You know, I sit there, I stare at it. It's crazy what numbers I can't deal with anymore. And in some ways, that's the disease to me. The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words, which I've dealt with words my entire life, you know, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
I think the thing that surprises me the most about my dementia is that it is progressive, and I'm finding that I'm forgetting more. And they do memory tests for me all the time at the doctor's, and so that becomes a little disconcerting at times to see my cognitive impairment continue to decline. But again, I really have hope. I don't live really in the future. I can't live in the future. I can't worry about what the future is going to bring. I have to live for today.
Now, the individuals we just heard from are living in the early stage of the disease. Symptoms worsen over time for everyone. However, people progress through stages of Alzheimer's at very different rates as their abilities change. So on average, a person with Alzheimer's lives anywhere from 4 to 8 years after diagnosis, but they can live as long as 20 years, depending on other factors. Now let's learn about the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Now, the progression of Alzheimer's disease from brain changes that one experiences, excuse me, that are unnoticeable to the person, to brain changes that cause problems with memory and eventually physical disability. This is called the Alzheimer's disease continuum. And there are 3 broad phases that are shown on this slide in teal and orange and purple. So the first stage is called asymptomatic. So in this phase, there may be changes in the brain long before a person begins to realize that they have symptoms or that they get a diagnosis. Now, as the disease progresses, the person will begin to experience mild symptoms, but they may still be able to independently perform most activities of everyday living. So in this phase, the person may be diagnosed with what's called mild cognitive impairment, or MCI. Mild cognitive impairment is an early stage of Alzheimer's disease, meaning hallmark changes in the brain, like amyloid buildup, are present. Now, MCI can develop for multiple reasons, and about 1/3 of people living with mild cognitive impairment may go on to develop dementia due to Alzheimer's within 5 years, but others will not. Mild cognitive impairment is a clinical diagnosis that represents a doctor's best professional judgment about the reason for a person's symptoms. Now, in the third phase, people who do develop dementia due to Alzheimer's will experience more serious changes in memory, thinking, and behavior. This phase is further broken down into stages called mild, moderate, and severe, sometimes referred to as early, middle, and late stage. Now, these stages reflect the degree to which symptoms interfere with the person's everyday activities. So it's important to understand that the stages of Alzheimer's are general, and because each person living with the disease has a unique experience, we can't always neatly place an individual into one specific stage or category. Some people might exhibit symptoms that overlap stages, but the stages do allow you to gain an understanding of the progression of the disease and how through it an individual's behaviors will change, as will the role of someone who's functioning in a caregiver position. So these stages can help caregivers through their journey as well. So to recap, there are 3 broad phases of Alzheimer's. The dementia phase is further broken down into 3 stages. Alzheimer's symptoms and progression are not one size fits all, and they're going to vary from person to person. And while symptoms will worsen over time, progression rates are going to vary among individuals. So now let's talk about treatments and what's out there. So until now, the only treatments that were available simply help with some of the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. However, they do not treat the underlying cause of Alzheimer's. Because each person experiences Alzheimer's very differently, these treatments can work in varying degrees, and they're not necessarily effective for everyone. So the treatments for symptoms of Alzheimer's disease include Aricept, which goes by the generic name of donepezil, Exelon, which goes by the generic name of rivastigmine, Razidine, which goes by the generic name of galantamine, Namenda, which is generically known as memantine, and Nemzeric, which is a combination of donepezil and memantine. Now, aducanumab, which is marketed currently as Aduhelm. This is a drug that was granted accelerated approval by the FDA in June of 2021. And this is the first treatment that addresses the underlying biology of Alzheimer's disease. Because everyone's experience is different, treatments are going to work to varying degrees, and they're not going to be universally effective. Early diagnosis of Alzheimer's is important because most of these drugs are going to work best and they're most effective when administered in the early stages. If you're interested in learning more about treatments, then please have a conversation with your doctor. So let's wrap up by discussing Alzheimer's research and advancements. So in the last decade, researchers have made enormous strides in understanding how Alzheimer's affects the brain, so there is some hope for the future. So let's hear from 2 scientists and 2 caregivers.
This is an incredibly exciting time in Alzheimer's and dementia research. The advancements that we've made in the last decade to understand the disease as a continuum, meaning that the biological changes are starting a decade or more before someone is experiencing the changes in the memory and thinking. This sets the stage for possible prevention. The idea that when we have the tools to identify those individuals at the earliest time point, and when we have the interventions to target individuals at that earliest time point, we can intervene to stop or slow the progression of the disease before an individual loses their memories.
Growing evidence indicates that people can reduce their risk of cognitive decline by adopting key lifestyle habits. More and more research shows that factors like exercise, nutrition, and aggressive management of cardiovascular risk factors may impact our ability to slow cognitive decline as we age. And through current studies, we're exploring how certain lifestyle factors may even reduce the risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia.
A lot of hope does come from the Alzheimer's Association, all the research that is being done. Even though there is not a cure today for the disease, I know in my heart there is going to be a cure one day. And I know we're getting closer for that cure. Because even if you fail in a research study, you learn from that failure in the research study. That failure always brings progression.
It's nice to see the association spearheading in many ways the emphasis on getting the money at the federal level and at the private sector to get the research done so that someday there will be an effective treatment, hopefully cure, hopefully prevention. It's nice to see the
Now, there are currently many drugs, diagnostic tests, and more in the research pipeline, but recruiting and retaining participants is now the greatest obstacle, other than funding, when it comes to research and advances. A clinical study is any type of clinical research that involves people. Trials test new interventions or drugs to prevent and detect diseases. So let's hear from two experts who share more about studies and trials.
Participating in a clinical study is one way that everyone can get involved in a very direct way in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. And for people who currently have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, there are some additional benefits. You get access to very close medical care. You also may be among the first people to have access to the treatments that will eventually prove to work.
You might hear the phrase negative trial, which means it didn't hit the endpoint. It didn't result in an FDA-approved treatment for the disease. But I think the only negative trial is one that doesn't provide us with valuable information. If the trial is well designed and is a good scientific experiment, we can get extremely valuable data that can help plan the next trial and make it even better than the last one. And it gets you that much closer to that FDA-approved drug, to that effective treatment, and maybe someday even prevention. By participating in clinical research, you can move us toward methods of treatment and prevention for all those affected by this devastating disease. Alzheimer's Association Trial Match is a free clinical studies matching service for those with dementia, caregivers, and healthy volunteers. To start, simply create a confidential user profile and receive a list of studies that may be a match for you. Don't just hope for a cure, help us find one.
So to recap, there has been an increase in the level of understanding of Alzheimer's and dementia in recent years. Without participation in trials and treatments, finding a cure is going to be nearly impossible. So it's especially critical that more people of diverse backgrounds participate so that the trials being conducted are truly representative of all the people who could take a medicine or receive a particular treatment. Clinical studies can provide participants with cutting-edge treatment and also additional medical care. There are a variety of studies that are taking place that needs participants. So if anyone is interested, you can check out Trial Match. Alzheimer's is difficult, but no one has to face this disease alone. The Alzheimer's Association is in communities across the country, providing direct service to individuals and families that are facing the disease. The Alzheimer's Association is the leading nonprofit funder of research, and it continues to invest in promising research in pursuit of new interventions and treatments. Our vision as an association is a world without Alzheimer's and all other forms of dementia. Now, the Alzheimer's Association has an incredible toolbox of resources for those that are living with dementia, their caregivers and their health teams, healthcare professionals, and friends and family. But there are three key resources that I want to highlight. So in my opinion, the 24/7 helpline is the most valuable resource. It fields about 300,000 calls a year, day or night, and on holidays. It's staffed by master's level clinicians who do care consultations. They help families navigate a crisis. They can provide general information about legal, financial, care, and other treatment options. Help is also available in more than 200 languages. So Tim is a caregiver, and he will share his story about calling the helpline for support.
I've had a couple of phone calls that I've been able to make in to the call center. When I've had a couple of quick questions that I wanted to ask. You know, there's been a couple of nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have questions, you have anxieties, and I was struggling dealing with them, and it's amazing. It was one of the best things I ever did was keeping the call center on my favorites now. Just to know that there's somebody you can call who is aware of what you're going through.
Now, the next resource I want to highlight is the association website at alz.org, and it's often the first stop for those that are diagnosed and also for their caregivers. So for people living with dementia, they can explore support and resources at alz.org/IHaveALZ, and caregivers can easily get help at alz.org/care. So we'll hear from Teresa about what information she wanted to learn and how it helped her plan for the future and feel supported.
When I went to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is alz.org, there I was trying to find out more about What was Alzheimer's? What really is this disease? What is younger onset Alzheimer's? What is dementia? Is there a cure? How long has this been around? How many people are affected by this? Where can I go for resources? Where can I go for help? What do I do with this? How can I handle this? Is there more people like me out there? Is there someone that I can talk to if I need to? And there I found the support line that's 24 hours a day. And there I found where I can go for workshops, where I can go and read things and postings that people have done, where I can find out what events is happening in the Alzheimer's Association, where I can see how it's affecting people around the globe.
And the third resource to highlight is the Community Resource Finder. So that's done in partnership with AARP, and it's a database of dementia and aging related resources. You can find Alzheimer's Association programs like this one. You can learn about resources available in your area, which include long-term care and community-based services like respite, transportation, and even doctors. So Tom, who's living with dementia, will talk about his experience.
Since I've been diagnosed with dementia, the one place that I know I can go to for assistance and help and support is to the Alzheimer's Association. There are people there that I know by name that I can contact if I'm having a difficult time or if I'm struggling to find some resource, that they will provide that to me.
So now that we've taken a basic look at Alzheimer's disease and what resources are available, let's talk about how you can take action. If you're interested in joining the fight, the first way is through volunteering. There are a variety of opportunities with the association at varying levels of commitment, and this is how I got started as a community educator. Next is you might become an advocate. Alzheimer's is a nonpartisan issue, and we work with our state and federal officials to bring change and to help make life better for those that are living with Alzheimer's and their care partners. The third is to consider participating in research. Trial Match is for both those who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and also those who have not, those that are healthy. Fourth is perhaps consider joining or forming a team for the Walk to End Alzheimer's. Now, some dates are still tentative, but events are being planned around the state and country. I believe the Wilmington Walk is scheduled currently for early November, but you can search on the website for the walk that's closest and most convenient for you. And finally, you can get involved with the Longest Day to help raise funds and awareness for the disease. More information on the Longest Day initiative is available on the Alzheimer's website, Alzheimer's Association website. Now that concludes today's program on understanding Alzheimer's and dementia. Are there any questions or anything you'd like to learn about at this point in time?
Awesome job, Tiffany. It was really good. I've dropped a few things in the chat, but I want to go ahead and turn it back over to Christine. She wants to share some of the resources, excellent resources that the New Hanover County Libraries have. And then again, like we mentioned, if you've got some specific or one-off questions, we can answer those after she does that part and we stop recording.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Can you all hear me? Yeah. All right. So I am going to, here we go. Here we are. So I am going to switch over to the library webpage and show you all some a location where you can find some resources. Again, we work closely with Alzheimer's Association, so we try to, and other local community organizations, and you can get a lot of good information at this area of our site. And also there are some items that you may be interested in checking out. So we're going to go here. Can you all see my screen? Great. So we're actually, let's see if I can move this. Here we go. Okay. So if you go to our website, which is nhclibrary.org, you'll be able to, you'll see this screen here, what this looks like. And if you go to the research area and health, over here, we have a number of topics that are health related, and one of those is going to be our memory care resources. So on here, most specifically, we have these memory care kits that have activities, information, pamphlets for people who are trying to focus on their memory care. And each kit also has a packet for caregivers too. So we try to keep our information up to date in there and provide a lot of the current pamphlets and current information in those. If you ever click on that, it'll take you straight to our catalog where you can place a hold on it and pick it up. So that we try to make it as easy as possible for everyone to get there. Under our general resources, we have resources that we've pulled from different areas across the internet. So we have podcasts, we have National Institute on Aging, we have the VA Family Caregiver Support Programs, Center for Disease Control, Medline Plus. That is all on here for our general resources. Under local resources, we have a list of local agencies that deal with memory care and support, caregiver support, Cape Fear Area on Aging, Project CARE, the Alzheimer's Association of Eastern North Carolina, and the Cameron Art Museum Connections Program. Under books, we have an updated list of new material in the library that deals with Alzheimer's Alzheimer's, dementia, and caregiving. And so these are really great resources if you're interested in reading about that to learn more. And then we have library and community programs. Now, this says no events are scheduled because we are currently in the event, and it's just set to change to that once the event has started. But we also have linked to Alzheimer's Association's calendar of events, and the recording from today will go here as well. So we try to have the recordings that we've done for these topics to be in here too. So you can always contact me. My name again is Christine Ingram. I'm happy to help connect you to resources and help answer some questions about what the library has and how we can better enhance our programming. With that, I am going to stop my share, and I am going to also stop the recording. So if anybody has specific questions, they are welcome to do that. And here we